The first thing Markel noticed about the Vethkai ship was that it smelled like nothing. Not the nothing of vacuum, or the nothing of a scrubbed room. Something more deliberate than that, a sensory absence that her brain kept trying to fill in and couldn't. She noticed it as they walked her through the docking corridor, 3 pale escorts with their 6-fingered hands held behind their backs in that patient formal way they had. Like funeral directors who had been at the profession so long they'd stopped seeing the dead as anything other than a scheduling problem. She had been awake for 11 hours. She had been in Vethkai custody for 9. She had stopped counting the days since the colony fell. The corridor ended in a circular chamber with a high, ribbed ceiling that contracted slightly every few minutes. A breathing motion, something metabolic in the architecture itself, and Mara hated it. She planted her feet and looked straight ahead. One of the escorts gestured toward the chair at the chamber's center. It was built for a human body, which told her this had been planned before they took her, which she had already assumed, but still felt like a thumb pressing a bruise. "Doctor." "Kel," said the one she had started thinking of as the tall one, because they were slightly taller than the others, and she needed to call them something. "You understand why you are here." She sat. The chair was not uncomfortable. That bothered her more than pain would have. "You found something in my records," she said. "We found everything in your records. Then you already know what you want. So why do you need me conscious?" The tall one looked at her for a moment in the way the Vethkai looked at everything, with those pale, lidless eyes that never quite stopped moving, tracking micro-expressions, she'd been told, reading the body like a seismograph. Because the procedure does not work on the unconscious, it said. It requires participation. Here was the moment she had been preparing for without knowing it. That cold, flat second where everything slots into place and you understand what is about to happen to you. She kept her face very still. She had a gift for that. "The Weissen process," she said. It was not a question. The tall one made a sound that was not quite a word. Something between acknowledgement and satisfaction. "You know the work. I read Dr. Aaron Weissen's papers when I was in graduate school." She paused. "I thought they were theoretical." "They became practical," said the tall one, "through additional development after Dr. Weissen shared them with us." The word shared sat in the room like something rotten. Mara said nothing. "The procedure is simple in concept." The tall one continued, moving to a console that flickered with a soft blue light, the color of shallow water over white sand. "We have mapped what your kind calls inherited memory, the residue of ancestral experience encoded in neural architecture. We believed it existed. We now know it does. In humans, the encoding is unusually dense, unusual even among the 17 species we have studied. And you want to access it. We want to access yours specifically." The tall one turned. "You are descended from a line that survived the founding wars, the siege of Station Ardennes, the Cassini withdrawal, events our own archives describe only from our perspective. We wish to see them from inside." Mara looked down at her hands. She had her mother's hands, broad across the knuckle, quick. Her mother had been a surgeon. Her grandmother had been a soldier. Her great-grandmother had walked out of the Cassini withdrawal on both legs when 40,000 others had not. "And if I refuse, you will not be harmed." The tall one said this as though it were simply a fact of physics, like saying water was wet. "The others from the colony who are currently in our care will remain in our care, indefinitely." She looked up. 42 people. She had the names. She said, "Show me the consent forms." They had consent forms. Of course they did. The Vethkai were meticulous. She read through 3 pages of careful, almost bureaucratic language, neural pathway stimulation, immersive ancestral reconstruction, voluntary participation, risks including disorientation, emotional flooding, temporary identity dissolution, and she signed at the bottom in her own handwriting, pressing the stylus harder than she needed to, because it was the only resistance available to her in that moment. The tall one took the form. The other 2 escorts positioned themselves on either side of the chair. The room's ceiling contracted again, slowly. That building breath that she had already decided she would never get used to. "How long will it take?" she asked. "That depends," said the tall one, "on how deep you go." They put a narrow band around her head. Cool, light. She almost laughed at how small it was. She had expected something massive, something that announced itself as a violation, but it was no bigger than the headband she used to wear in the lab when her hair got in the way of the work. She thought, "I am the work now." Then the world went sideways and she fell into herself. The first thing she understood was that she was standing on cobblestones. The second was that she was cold, not the regulated chill of a ship, but the thick organic cold of a city in autumn, a cold that smelled of coal smoke and river water and something biological that she couldn't name. The third was that she was wearing a coat that was not hers, and it fit perfectly. She stood at the edge of a narrow street that could not have been more than 400 years old, lantern-lit, slicked with recent rain. A crowd had gathered 20 meters ahead. She could hear voices, the layered, anxious murmur of people who have come upon something they cannot explain. She walked toward it. The cobblestones were uneven, and she navigated them without looking down, which told her some part of her, some deeper layer, knew this street. The crowd parted for her as she approached. Not with recognition, something less specific than that, more like the parting that happens when someone moves with certainty, when a body broadcasts direction and doesn't apologize for its trajectory. She had a flash of her grandmother's voice. "You walk like you own the ground under your feet, Mara. That's a gift. Don't waste it." She reached the center of the crowd. A body. A man, middle-aged, prosperous coat, his face in the cobblestones. Whatever had been done to him had been done quickly and with complete conviction. Mara felt something rise in her that was not hers. Something old and cold and extremely calm. She recognized it the way you recognize a stranger's face that looks almost like someone you know. Close enough to unsettle, not close enough to name. Her hands were steady at her sides. They were her hands, but they remembered things she didn't. "Mara," she turned. A man stood at the edge of the crowd, dressed in clothes that were wrong for the period. Too clean, too smooth, the fabric catching the lantern light in a way wool never did, Dr. Wyson. Or the thing that wore his shape in here. "Where am I?" she said. "You know where you are. I mean in the process. I mean in terms of what's real. The process creates a fully immersive environment drawn from your encoded neural architecture," said the Wyson shape. "What you see here is not simulation. It is reconstruction. There is a difference, and the difference is a simulation is built. A reconstruction is remembered." He gestured at the street, the crowd, the wet cobblestones, and the coal smoke dark. All of this was witnessed by someone who stood in your bloodline. Mara looked back at the body on the ground. The cold thing in her chest pulsed once, slow. "My ancestor." "Yes. Which one?" The Wyson shape did not answer. But something shifted in the air, a flicker of something close to discomfort, which was the first thing she had seen from any version of the Vethkai that looked like a mistake. She filed it away. "What do you want me to do?" she said. "Let the memory surface. Do not resist. The more you resist, the longer the process takes and the more disorienting the discontinuities become." She looked at him steadily. "And you're observing all of this?" "Yes. You can see everything I access. That is the purpose of the procedure." She nodded slowly, as though absorbing this, as though it were new information, and not the thing she had been thinking about since they strapped the band to her head. She turned back to the body on the cobblestones. Somewhere behind her, in layers of reality she couldn't see, 3 Vethkai with their moving eyes and their 6-fingered hands were watching a readout that mapped everything she felt and remembered and feared. She thought about her grandmother. She thought about the Cassini withdrawal. She thought, then let's give them something worth watching. The memory unfolded like a map. She had learned to read topographic maps as a child, her grandmother's idea, the old paper kind, contour lines dense and patient, the land's shape translated into language. She had loved the discipline of it. The way you could look at a flat sheet of lines and curves and see, if you were paying attention, exactly where the high ground was. She let the memory take her the way you let a current take you when you're a strong swimmer, with awareness, not surrender. Her ancestor moved through Victorian London with the economy of someone who had other things to think about. She was a woman who had learned to disappear in plain sight, the trick of the unremarkable, the skill of being precisely as visible as you wanted to be and not 1 degree more. Mara felt it as a physical thing, the skill, the set of the shoulders, the pace of the step. It was in her bones. It had been waiting there, patient and encoded, for 180 years. The cold thing in her chest grew slightly warmer. This was why they wanted her. Not just the Cassini withdrawal, not just the history, this. Whatever her bloodline had accumulated across generations of surviving in difficult circumstances. The Vethkai had 17 species worth of data, and they still didn't understand it. They kept reading it like a military report when it was something else entirely. Mara walked her ancestors' walk and thought, carefully, about how to use what she now understood. The city shifted around her. Time moved differently here. Not in a straight line, but in layers, the way memories stack, so that she could be on this street in 1888 and simultaneously walking the evacuation corridor of Station Ardennes in 2217 and pulling her younger sister out of the wreckage of a ground car on a colony road in 2341. All of them Kel's, all of them hers. She stopped resisting and let them through. It was extraordinary, and it was terrible. The Station Ardennes memory hit like a physical blow. Noise, smoke, the specific quality of panic in a corridor where the gravity plating was failing, and every third step sent you lurching sideways. And somewhere ahead of her, an ancestor whose name she would never know was organizing a rearguard action with whatever was available, which was not enough, which was never enough, and doing it anyway with a calm that wasn't the absence of fear but the management of it, the deliberate, practiced, deeply human act of feeling the fear all the way to the floor and then taking the next step regardless. She felt the Vethkai observing, and she let them observe. She let them see all of it. She was counting. She was counting because her grandmother had told her. When she was 6, when she was 8, when she was 13, and impatient, you always know where you are, Mara. You always know what resources you have. Everything else is noise. She counted the memories. She counted what they contained. She counted the shape of the thing that the Vethkai were actually looking for, because it was not, she was increasingly sure, simply historical data. The London memory surfaced again. Her ancestor paused at the end of a narrow alley, and Mara paused with her. Down the alley, 3 men in a configuration she recognized from the Ardennes memory, from a dozen other memories, from the deep grammar of situations where something bad was being decided. The prey and predator geometry. She had always had an instinct for it. Now she knew it was literally inherited. Her ancestor watched the 3 men for exactly long enough to know what they were doing, and not 1 second longer. Then she turned and walked the other way. Not running, walking. Mara felt something that was almost humor. Her ancestor had known, that night, exactly what she was, and exactly what that meant, and she had chosen to walk the other way. Fascinating, said the Weissenshape, appearing at her elbow. She said nothing. You're accessing multiple layers simultaneously. That is not supposed to be possible at this stage of the procedure. I'm a fast learner. The Weissenshape made that near-word sound again. The Vethkai researching this process have noted that humans adapt to it more quickly than any other species. We had theorized this was a matter of neural plasticity. And now? Now I believe it is a matter of practice. Something in his tone shifted. Humans rehearse interior experience. You narrate yourselves to yourselves constantly. You have been doing this from the first moment. You have not stopped processing since they brought you aboard. She looked at him. Does that concern you? The pause before his answer was very small, but it was there. It is notable, he said. She smiled, just slightly, in the way her grandmother had smiled when someone said something that confirmed what she already knew. The memory landscape shivered. Another layer tried to surface, and she held it back. Not because she was afraid of it, but because she wanted to choose the moment. The Cassini withdrawal. She could feel it under everything else, vast and heavy, the way a deep current is heavier than surface water. 40,000 people. The ones who didn't come back, and the ones who did. She thought about what information looked like from the outside. She thought about what the Vethkai were seeing on their readouts. A human woman moving through encoded ancestral memory with increasing fluency. The neural activation patterns spreading in ways their models hadn't predicted. They were learning about her. They were accumulating data. She thought about what data could be made to say. A memory she had not been born with yet fully surfaced. The engineering deck of Station Ardennes, 6 hours before the end. An ancestor, she had no name for her, felt her as a kind of density, a purposefulness, working at a console with 2 other people, talking quietly, their hands moving. The enemy fleet was 3 hours out. The evacuation had 11,000 people still waiting for shuttles. The ancestor was doing math, the kind of math that you did when the answer was unacceptable, and you needed to find a different answer. Mara felt her own hands flex in her lap, in the chair on the Vethkai ship, 150 years and 400 light years away. The ancestor found the different answer. It was not a solution anyone would have called elegant. It was not something any of the 17 species in the Vethkai files would have predicted, because it required a particular human calculus. The one where you look at everything that cannot be saved and decide what the everything that can be saved will cost you. And then you pay it without flinching and you don't look back. Mara let the memory play out. She felt the Vethkai observing very intently now. Good. Because she had been counting, and she had what she needed. The Bison shape crouched slightly, an alert posture she had not seen from it before, something reactive. Dr. Kell, your cortical activity is... I know, she said. I've been watching it too. She had learned, somewhere in the layered memories of her bloodline, that there were two kinds of intelligence, the kind that accumulated data and the kind that understood what data was for. The Vethkai were extraordinary at the first. 17 species, millennia of patient careful observation, archives that dwarfed anything humanity had built. But they had asked for this. They had brought a member of a specific bloodline aboard their ship and strapped a neural reader to her head and opened the door and said, "Walk through," because they thought they understood what they would find on the other side. They had not understood that the bloodline they'd selected was selected specifically because every person in it had survived by reading situations faster than the situations could read them. She surfaced the Cassini memory. It came up whole and enormous, the way a deep-sea creature rises, slowly and then all at once. The scale of it staggered her, even though she was ready, even though she had been bracing since she'd felt it under everything else. 40,000 people. The sounds. She had not expected the sounds, the specific human frequencies of 40,000 people in extremity, layered and dense and awful. And underneath it, her ancestor. A woman at the end of a corridor with a handhold, keeping her upright and her boots on the floor of a ship that was actively breaking apart, making a decision about a blast door. The decision. Mara had heard the story. Everyone in her family had heard the story. Her grandmother told it without drama, with the same flat matter-of-factness she'd brought to everything. The blast door, the timing, what had to happen first, what had to happen second, the window in which it was possible to make both things true. And then the part the family had never quite talked about directly, what it cost. She let the Vethkai read all of it. She let them see the math, the decision, the cost. She let them see the woman at the blast door, and she let them see what happened in her face, in the moment before she acted. That specific human expression that had no equivalent in the 17 species archives. The one that was not quite courage and not quite grief, but something that required both to exist. A compound emotion that didn't resolve into either. She felt the Bison shape go very still beside her. "What is that?" it said. And its voice had changed. Not fear. The Vethkai did not fear in the human way. Something that was nevertheless in the same emotional territory. The sensation of encountering something that does not fit the existing models. "That's what you came for, isn't it?" Mara said. "We came for historical data." "No, you came for that." She gestured at the memory still hanging in the air between them. "You came for the part you couldn't read from the outside. You've been watching humans for centuries and you can't figure out why we do it, why we make decisions like that, decisions that don't optimize for survival, decisions that your models predict incorrectly 18% of the time. You came here to look at the source code." The Bison shape was quiet. "And now you've seen it," Mara said. "Did it help?" Another pause, longer this time. "We don't know yet," it said, and she believed it because it was exactly what she would have said. She thought, good. Because the thing the Vethkai had not modeled, the thing that 17 species worth of behavioral data had not prepared them for, was that you could not observe this particular thing without being changed by the observation. You could not look directly at that face, at the compound emotion in the instant before the blast door, without having your own architecture rearranged, however slightly. She had felt it in herself every time she accessed the memory. She was not the same person who had sat down in this chair. Neither, she suspected, was the tall one watching her readouts on the other side of this procedure. She said, "I want to make you an offer." The Victorian street dissolved. They were in a different kind of space now, a neutral interstice, the memoryscape at low tide. Just her and the Bison shape face to face. "You want to negotiate," it said. "I want to talk. There's a difference." She had inherited the knack from the same bloodline she'd been swimming in for the last. She didn't know how long, actually. She had lost track of time in the usual sense. But it did not matter because she had not lost track of anything else. "You've been watching us for a long time," she said. "You have 17 species in your archives, and you've been studying us the longest, and you still can't predict us with confidence. I've just given you a direct view of why. I'm not asking for anything unusual in return. I'm asking for the 42 people from my colony. The procedure is not complete. I think you have what you came for." The Bison shape considered this. "There is more," it said. There are layers we haven't. I know there are more layers. She met its pale, moving eyes without flinching. There are always more layers. That's the whole problem, isn't it? You keep going deeper and finding more, and the more you find, the more you can't account for. You could run this procedure for a month and be further from certainty than when you started. She paused. I'm a scientist. I know what unfalsifiable looks like. The Weissen's shape made the near word sound a third time, and this time she thought she heard something different in it. Something that was not quite admiration but was in the same neighborhood. What you are proposing, it said carefully, is a cessation based on the argument that further data collection will not improve our model. Yes, that is. It paused. That is a methodologically sound argument. I know. She allowed herself the smallest smile. I've been told I walk like I own the ground under my feet. The landscape shifted once more, and she felt the band on her head and the chair under her body and the ship's recycled air, which still smelled of nothing, which she would never stop hating. She opened her eyes. The tall one was standing 2 meters away, watching her. Its 6-fingered hands were held at its sides, not behind its back, which was a change from before. Its eyes moved steadily across her face. The procedure is concluded, it said. I know. Mara's voice came out steady. She was proud of that. You were aware, during the final stages, that we were considering extending it. Yes. And you made a calculation. Yes. The tall one was quiet for a moment, in the manner of a very large and very careful thing that is revising its position. Your ancestor, it said at last, at Station Ardennes. She made a similar calculation. Mara said nothing. She had learned the utility of silence from the same place she had learned everything else useful. The pattern in the neural data, the tall one continued, the one that our models cannot account for. We have been interpreting it as an anomaly, a flaw in the encoding, an error introduced by. It stopped. We have been incorrect. What do you think it is now? The tall one looked at her with its pale, unblinking eyes, and she thought she saw something in them that she had not seen before, a quality of attention that was different from assessment. Something closer, she thought to wonder. Deliberate choice, it said, made in full knowledge of cost. Mara nodded. That's it. That's what you've been looking for. It does not optimize. No, it is not predictable. Not from the outside. No, it is. The tall one paused. For so long she almost spoke to fill the silence, but caught herself. It is what we do not have. The room breathed again, the ceiling contracting once, slow and organic. Mara watched it. The 42 people from my colony, she said. You said I wouldn't be harmed if I participated. I participated. Yes. The tall one looked down at the small form in its hand, the consent form, still, the one she'd signed with the hard-pressed stylus. It set it down on the console. They will be returned within 6 hours, including you. Mara stood, her legs held. She had been afraid they might not. The 3 escorts were watching her. She looked at each of them in turn, the way her grandmother had taught her to look at rooms when she entered them. With inventory, not confrontation, taking stock of everything available. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes, said the tall one. The other people you ran this on, the other species, what did you find in them? The tall one considered whether to answer. Data, it said at last. History, pattern. Memory, in the standard sense. Nothing like this. Nothing like this. She nodded slowly, absorbing it, the way she absorbed the things her grandmother had told her, fully, carefully, without rushing. She had a lot to think about. She had learned things in that chair that she was still unpacking. Things her bloodline had carried for generations without knowing what they were carrying, without knowing they were carrying anything at all. The strange, enormous, mostly terrible gift of being specifically human. She thought about the woman at the blast door of the Cassini station, and the woman who had walked calmly away from an alley in 1888 London, and the ancestor at the console on Station Ardennes doing the math that could not be done. She thought about all the ways the Vethkai had been watching humanity and had read everything correctly except the thing that mattered. She said, You know what would help you with your model. The tall one waited. Stop trying to predict us. She picked up the stylus from the console, her own small, private theft, a souvenir, and tucked it into the pocket of the clothes they'd given her. Prediction requires as a closed system. We're not a closed system. You can't predict an open system. You can only watch it and be surprised. She walked toward the corridor. Her footsteps were even. She was counting again, out of habit, out of inheritance, 9 steps to the door, the weight of the stylus in her pocket, the names of 42 people she was going home with. The ceiling breathed behind her. She didn't look back. 6 hours later, On a Vethkai transport running dark toward the nearest human-held station, Mara sat in a seat near the back and looked at the 41 other people from her colony, all of them alive, all of them looking at her with the particular exhausted relief of people who have stopped holding their breath. She had said very little since the handoff. She had counted them. She had confirmed they were unharmed. She had done the inventory. A woman named Petra, who had been a water systems engineer before the colony fell, leaned over and said quietly, "What happened to you in there?" Mara considered the question. The stylus was still in her pocket. The memory landscape was still accessible if she closed her eyes. She had a feeling it would remain accessible, that whatever the neural procedure had opened it had not closed, that she was going to spend the rest of her life having occasional moments of complete clarity about things that had happened to people she'd never met, who nevertheless lived in her bones. She thought about the tall one's face when it said, "It is what we do not have." She thought about the 17 species in the archive. She thought about the blast door and the math and the cost. "They wanted to understand us," she said. Petra waited. "I think they're starting to." Mara settled back in the seat. Outside the viewport, stars were moving. They were at speed. The station 2 hours out. The dark between here and there, clean and cold and traversable. That might be the most important thing that's happened in this war. Petra looked at her for a long moment with the particular expression of someone deciding whether to ask the follow-up question. She decided not to. Mara closed her eyes. She was standing in Victorian London, and on the evacuation corridor of Station Ardennes, and at a blast door with a decision to make, and in a chair on a Vethkai ship with a band around her head, all at once, all simultaneously, all hers. She breathed out. She walked like she owned the ground under her feet.